Who in the audience? There's another hand up in the back.
I'd like to ask a follow-up on that. You say it might take at least a decade for that to come to fruition. Does anyone really account for that? Does anyone track that? Or does, you're absolutely right, it seems like our governors take these trips and they talk about, we're going to do this, we're going to get this, we get agreements. But does anyone actually track that to see if it comes to fruition?
The Economic Development Partnership sort of tracks those kinds of things, but they also don't, or less, a lot of what they do is not covered by FOIA. You actually have more difficulty getting information about them because a lot of the things that they're doing are sensitive. So they're sort of a mysterious organization in some ways, and so it's hard to actually find out from them in a definitive way what's happening.
I don't know, maybe someone at this table knows, or maybe you know, Senator Janet Howell had a bill this session that actually would track all these things, but I don't know what happened to that
It
bill.
went to a study committee.
It's a JLO. They're doing a study now.
That's correct.
And a number of us are raising questions about the implications of all these tax credits that we're giving and whether they're actually generating the jobs that they presumably generate. You're talking about millions of dollars.
You had a bill, didn't you?
Some
related to that?
No, well.
Yours was a budget bill.
I had a transparency bill, but I raised some questions about the coal credit, for example, which is anywhere from $41 million a year to $90 million a year, and we don't really know how many jobs it creates. So
that's
the
right.
JLOC study will
That's
hopefully
right.
get
So there's the legislative arm, I mean, the audit, basically those that audit, there's going to be an audit, basically, that would look at some of these things.
It's a full-time study commission and professional staff. They regularly study these kinds of things. So I don't know what the time frame on it was, if they're supposed to finish it this year.
And I think there's also a sort of some duty for the press to do that long term, but as Christina said, the challenge for that is that the legislature has decided to give the Economic Development Partnership exemptions from the Freedom of Information Act, and so it makes it very difficult for us to get the documents when they're not deemed public documents. And so that's one of the challenges, but I think, being honest, I think the press has a certain role in trying to track that long term.
Let's go to a question in the back of the house.
Thank you. I saw a note recently that the Virginia Family Foundation got about $1 million from a national donor, and it makes sense that they may be using that money to influence opinion or policy without trespassing on laws and rules for their incorporated status. So I have a question about the power of the Virginia Family Foundation. What is that power in Virginia policy? And perhaps the personal power of Victoria Cobb, and perhaps her spouse, I believe, is in the health secretariat. Is that correct?
That's right.
And then another question to that is, that last year at this time, we were all been Tea Party this and Tea Party that. Did that disappear?
Who would like to talk?
Well, I can start with the Family Foundation. I didn't know about the donation you were referring to, but they do. The Family Foundation is influential, like many advocacy groups. For those of you who don't know, the Family Foundation is a conservative advocacy group, and they deal with a lot of issues in Richmond that they lobby on a lot of issues that deal with, let's see, I don't know, family. Thank you.
Right to life issues.
Yeah, abortion, well, you said gay rights, but not gay rights. Yeah, the opposite of that. But they actually also deal with like school issues, like charter schools, the education. So they deal with a lot of issues. I think they're pretty influential. I mean, they've been around. I don't even know how long, quite a while, and I think they're quite influential. Victoria Cobb is the head of that organization. Her husband does work for Governor McDonnell. is the assistant or deputy secretary under Secretary Hazel, who's Health and Human Resources Secretariat. And many people have raised that relationship. He's been working for him since the beginning of the administration, and many people have raised that concern. I've asked her about it several times, as have many other people, and she brushes it aside and says that there is no conflict and they don't, that there's nothing there, that they don't discuss it, or she doesn't talk to him or lobby him, and the governor's office similarly does the same thing. Obviously, they're like-minded on a lot of things because the Family Foundation and Governor McDonald agree on many issues. I'm not sure that, they already have agreed on many issues. I'm not sure that Victoria Cobb and Matt Cobb needed to have that relationship for them to agree on those issues. But people seem to think that that's an issue, so people can have that, opinion if they want to have it. I don't know what the reality is there. I don't know if someone else wants to take a crack at it. They are influential. There are many groups that lobby in Richmond, and they are an influential group on that side of the spectrum.
How about the Tea Party? Has it gone away or not?
No, I would say actually that I feel like it's become, more of an influence, but less of I don't want to say less of a news story, it's just less of a new thing, but I think it's more deeply influential, within largely conservative circles in Republican politics. I think you're seeing more people talk, sort of the Tea Party talk. You've got George Allen out there trying to be the Tea Party guy. You would have thought you would see George Allen trying to be more conservative. So I definitely don't think they've gone away. I think they've gotten more influential and more involved and more mainstream.
I think it's this year maybe a good test for that. They really were not very successful in the congressional elections because the Tea Party they are happy that they emphasize their independence. So that also means though that within that sort of amorphous organization, they don't all agree, and so they had trouble reaching consensus on candidates, and therefore they were not very successful in nomination contests for Congress. They have a candidate, or actually I guess there's actually more than one Tea Party candidate that's interested in the U.S. Senate Republican nomination, but again, they're sort of in little fractions, and Jamie Radke is getting some attention, but she's not raising a huge amount of money, so it's not clear how viable she will be. I guess the real test for the Tea Party is can they run candidates in House and Senate elections where they can really get a foothold in that way. And below the radar with redistricting, one thing that was going on, and we'll see now how successful they were, is whereas the Republican legislators kind of tried to court the Tea Party, they're also aware of people who are affiliated with Tea Party who might want to challenge them in primaries this year, and so they would try to draw their districts to get those guys into somebody else's district. And so we'll see how many of those primary challenges they were able to avert as some of the candidates start to file here, and how many Republicans actually are challenged by Tea Party.
This was the first year, the first legislative session that the Tea Party actually tried to get legislation passed, and they were very unsuccessful. And it was not just because the Senate is controlled by Democrats. That was partly the reason. They actually had trouble getting some of their issues passed through the House as well, which, as you know, is controlled by Republicans. Some of those things they got passed through the House and it died in the Senate, but some of those things they couldn't even get passed through the House. Because even the House didn't like some of those issues. So it was interesting. I did a story after the session, just sort of talking to them about why they had some trouble this year. And they said it was their first time lobbying, and they were sort of learning their way as to how to go about lobbying in Richmond and what that was like. And they learned a lot of lessons that they were going to use for next year, that they had to start earlier, and that they just couldn't come up and try to lobby along with everyone else, that they had to sort of do it behind the scenes, and they learned a lot about lobbying and how that worked, and that they had to hone in on certain issues instead of try to do too many things. And so they learned a lot about how the process worked. So again, a lot of it had to do with this divided government, and that a lot of the Democrats didn't go with what they wanted, but there were some other issues that they also had some problems with.
And a good example of that was after Governor McDonnell's transportation plan, which had $3 billion in debt, and after it had really essentially gone through all of the votes, only then did the Tea Party send out an email saying that they were against it because of the debt.
Yeah.
So really, really late in the game.
Right.
And the other thing too, in terms of just sort of the Tea Party's impact, if you'll remember, it's hard to believe that this was only a year ago, but if you think back to where we were a year ago, those of us in the 5th District remember just the incredibly convoluted Republican field for that race. And that was just a year ago that all of that was being sorted out and everything else. And as Christina pointed out, because there were so many candidates that posed a problem for the Tea Party, and many of them thought Robert Hurt was sort of the establishment figure, and you saw Robert Hurt come flying out of that primary because the Tea Party vote was sort of diluted among all of these other different candidates. And so we're not, even though it feels like it was a long time ago, I don't think we're that far removed from that election.
Were there issues in the social agenda that traditionally comes year to year to the General Assembly that were decided one way or the other any differently this year, or was Bob Marshall doing something else?
But there was abortion.
Yeah.
The hospital standards for the clinics.
Right.
That was the largest piece.
Yeah, that was the biggest surprise. Clearly, the Senate Democrats didn't see it coming since they managed to get by them. But somebody else can, I don't remember the exact, they used the parliamentary procedure pretty much to attach an amendment on a bill and get it through so that it would not go through the Senate committee that always kills abortion bills. It would instead go to the Senate floor, where they managed to get a couple of conservative Democrats to vote for it, and then it passed.
And this was a proposal that had been made many, many years in a row by Delegate Marshall and others to require abortion clinics to follow the same standards as an outpatient ambulatory surgery center. So now the question is exactly what will that mean? And so now it goes through a regulatory process to determine what the exact requirements will be for abortion clinics. But clearly some of them will have to either renovate their building or they won't be able to operate anymore.
In this session, if you think back, Governor McDonnell's first session, the administration made a very deliberate attempt to avoid social issues altogether. I mean, they had very few social policy bills, period. It was, right after the election, the thesis issue had obviously been a part of that campaign, Bob's for Jobs, and so they came into that very first session with a very deliberate focus on jobs, the economy, tax credits, that sort of thing, and largely stayed away from social issues. And this year, you sort of saw them kind of, not every bill, but you saw them much more involved with social policy bills this year. There were reports that, the administration was involved in that sort of behind-the-scenes wrangling on that abortion bill. There were other bills that they were involved in this year that you could see they were sort of starting to reassert themselves on that front.